Well, good evening. On behalf of the Knights of Columbus and the John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family, I'm pleased to welcome you this evening to our 6th annual Michael J. McGivney Lectures, this year presented on the topic Human Nature and Scientific Knowledge. We begin this evening with the subject, the origin of man. And without further encroachment on his time, I'm honored to introduce to you Professor Jérôme Lejeune.
Merci beaucoup. During those talk, I'm supposed to discuss with you first this evening the origin of man. It is a very complex topic, and I decided to use what Mr. Marett was telling to his student at the beginning of his talk about physiology, and he said that all my stories are true, but some of them are truer than others. That's really what we can tell about the origin of man. All those stories are supposed to be true, but probably some of them are partially true. To begin with, I would remember you of a very nice description of the theory of evolution by a great Danish poet, Hans Christian Andersen. He wrote a very charming novel which is called The Nightingale of the Emperor. It's in China. And it begins that way. In China, the emperor is Chinese, and all the people around him are also Chinese. Then he continued to the talk, but a storyteller of the Darwinian obedience would continue telling us that the Chinese with the time will become more Chinese because they will adapt themselves to China. And on the reverse, Americans will become more American because they will adapt to America. And after a while, Chinese will be that much Chinese, and American will be that much American, that no cross would be any longer possible between a Chinese and American girl, or an American man, a Chinese girl. That's the way supposedly species are coming by the neo-Darwinian principle. While evidently no professor of genetics is teaching the story of the nightingale of the Emperor of China, but still it's what is written in the books. We are not obliged to tell that Chinese will not cross with Americans because we know they can, and they do. But because they cannot speak and cannot say the contrary, it is taught about the seagulls. Mr. Mayer, who is a great evolutionist, especially in this country, has studied the seagulls around the North Pole. Seagulls are different in Asia and in America. And they meet together in the Northern Europe. And they don't crisscross. They don't make eggs together. And Mr. Mayer considered that it was a very good example that adaptation to Asiatic north of Siberia and adaptation to American north of Canada was so great that finally the two species were emerging by separation of the genus Larus. Well, that's written in every textbook of genetics. But around 15 years ago, a very keen experimenter, Mr. Smith, had the idea to look about the matter. And because the Asiatic seagull do not mate with American seagull, he was wondering how they could recognize that they were Asiatic or American. And he discovered that it was because of the color of the rim of the eye, which was different in the two varieties, that they could recognize each other. Then he took a female from Asia, and he, with a very nice makeup around the rim of the eye, he painted her on the American way. And he took an American seagull boy and painted in the Asiatic way, so that by a double mistake, the two volatiles suppose they were recognizing each other, and they got very nice little seagulls. That was an exceedingly interesting experiment, because for the first time we had the proof that racism and apartheid is an animal thought which is present in animals. Unfortunately, a careful makeup is not sufficient all the times to suppress it. If we are left now with the experiment, we are in a very difficult situation to try to understand what can be the basis of variation from one species to another one. From all that we know, the mutations occur at random. And when we mean at random, it means that it's not a special flavor, a special tendency of the surrounding milieu which will change a gene, but it will be a sudden shift in the formula of the DNA, which cannot be foreseen, which cannot be directed, so that any mutation is fortuitous. The second phenomenon we know, that selection is playing a big role in the sense that if that new mutation is no good, either the new mutant will disappear because it cannot survive, or will not have a great progeny just because at the selective mating system it will be the loser. And finally, we are supposed to believe that mutation by random change and selection by the medium would explain evolution, would explain the origin of the species. That is exceedingly interesting because we have to swallow that chance and necessity can explain everything in nature. That remembers you probably of an old apory, an old say of Democritus, who was saying that everything in nature is a fruit of chance and necessity. And with the knowledge which was available in his time, Jacques Monod, who was the last of the Darwinian of strict obedience, was proposing that really all the history of life could be summarized by chance and necessity as the two factors at work, and he called his book Le hasard et la nécessité, and it was translated in English, Chance and Necessity. He had to come that far to pretend that blind chance, playing with matter and selecting matter by necessity, was even able to invent this closed-circuit television that we have in our head, which is the eye. It's difficult to believe that.